Just as I thought I had everything figured out, my father's voicemail shattered my world. "You're out of the family business." That was the moment everything changed. Hey there. Welcome to today's story. Before we dive in, I want to ask, what are you up to right now? Are you settled in, ready to hear an inspiring tale? Today, we'll be stepping into the world of a character who is about to face some truly tough decisions. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt like everything was slipping through your fingers? Maybe you've been forced to make a life-changing choice or had to pick yourself up after a huge setback. Well, in today's story, we follow Lena, a woman who has everything she's worked for taken away in an instant, and now she has to fight to rebuild. Will she make it? Stick around to find out. If you enjoy this story and want to hear more, don't forget to subscribe. Your support keeps me motivated to bring you more powerful stories like this one. Thanks so much for being here. Let's get started.
My name is Lena Carter, and I am the daughter of Victor Carter, founder of Carter Construction, a company built from the ground up. But this story isn't about the tall buildings or the million-dollar contracts. It's about a house built on love, trust, and ultimately betrayal. It's about a legacy that I thought would last forever, but in the blink of an eye, I was shut out of the very thing I had worked my whole life for. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, Carter Construction wasn't just a business, it was everything. It was in my blood, my veins, my bones. From the moment I could walk, I was running around construction sites, watching my father work, breathing in the smell of freshly cut wood and concrete. My dad used to say, "Lena, everything starts with a solid foundation. If you don't have that, everything will crumble." Those words stuck with me long after I could no longer be his little girl sitting on his shoulders, watching him build the world around us. By the time I was 10, I could read blueprints. At 14, I was helping with the company's accounting during the summer. I knew I was different from other kids. My friends were at the mall or hanging out at the movies, but I was always at the office, filing papers, meeting clients, or making sure the team had everything they needed. It wasn't a chore, it was a passion. I wasn't just a girl, I was the heir to a legacy. My father had built Carter Construction from the ground up, literally. He started with nothing but a beat-up pickup truck and a dream. He worked 70-hour weeks, and through grit, determination, and an unshakable work ethic, he turned it into a multi-million-dollar company. And that, of course, was where I fit in. I wasn't just the daughter of the founder, I was his successor in the making. Or so I thought. When I went off to college at the University of Oregon, I was sure of one thing: Carter Construction was my destiny. I majored in business administration and sustainable building design, thinking I'd combine the best of both worlds, keeping the company traditional but forward-thinking. I graduated summa cum laude, delivered the student commencement speech, and had job offers pouring in from 3 major construction firms. But there was never a question where I would go. Carter Construction was my path. After I graduated, I was ready to hit the ground running. I joined the company and started from the bottom in project management, determined to prove myself. No nepotism, no shortcuts. I worked harder than anyone else, clocking in before dawn and leaving well after dark. The men I worked with respected me not because I was Victor Carter's daughter, but because I knew the business inside and out, and I wasn't afraid to get my hands dirty. And it paid off. My dedication and innovative ideas led to rapid promotions. By 27, I was Vice President of Operations, and under my leadership, the company had expanded from residential projects to massive commercial buildings across 3 states. The revenue doubled in the 5 years I had been full-time with Carter Construction. We were no longer just a local business, we were an industry leader. I had made it. My dad was proud, but I knew he saw me as the one who would carry the company into the future. I was the heir, the next generation. But as my success grew, so did the tensions in our family. My brother Ryan, 3 years older than me, had always seemed to live in the shadow of my achievements. He worked in sales. He was charming and charismatic, but lacked the follow-through. The clients loved him, but his promises were often empty, and I found myself cleaning up his messes. But no matter how many times I bailed him out, Dad always had his back. "He'll grow into it," my father would say. "Not everyone hits the ground running like you, Lena." In a way, I understood. Ryan was my brother. We had grown up together, and I wanted him to succeed, even if I had to help him along the way. But when my father started talking about passing the torch, of taking the company to new heights, Ryan wasn't the one he turned to. No, it was me. And I wasn't sure how I felt about that. My father's legacy was always something I respected, but now I found myself fighting to keep up with it, fighting to prove I wasn't just the boss's daughter, but a woman who could lead this company into the future. I spent years thinking that this was what I was meant to do: lead the company, carry the family legacy, and make my father proud. But what happens when your entire identity is tied to a legacy that isn't entirely yours to control? The cracks in the foundation started appearing subtly at first. My father had begun spending more time with Ryan. They would have lunch together almost every day, and when I walked into the room, they would suddenly stop talking. At first, I thought it was nothing, just some father-son bonding. But then things began changing at the company. Projects I had carefully planned were being reassigned. Decisions I had made were being undone, and I was left out of key meetings. I would ask my father what was going on, and he would brush me off, saying it was nothing important. But I could feel it. The walls were closing in on me, and for the first time in my life, I started doubting myself. Was my place at Carter Construction truly secured, or was it all just an illusion? The cracks in the foundation started appearing subtly at first. My father had begun spending more time with Ryan. They would have lunch together almost every day, and when I walked into the room, they would suddenly stop talking. At first, I thought it was nothing, just some father-son bonding. But then things began changing at the company. Projects I had carefully planned were being reassigned. Decisions I had made were being undone, and I was left out of key meetings. I would ask my father what was going on, and he would brush me off, saying it was nothing important. But I could feel it. The walls were closing in on me, and for the first time in my life, I started doubting myself. Was my place at Carter Construction truly secured, or was it all just an illusion? The first hint of trouble came during one of our quarterly planning meetings. I had spent weeks preparing a presentation on expanding our use of eco-friendly materials across all our projects. The numbers backed me up. Sustainable builds were commanding a premium price and attracting positive press. I was excited to present my findings, convinced that this could be a turning point for Carter Construction, positioning us as leaders in a rapidly changing market. But when I pulled up my slides, I noticed my father wasn't paying attention. He glanced at his watch, then at the clock on the wall. His usual enthusiasm was gone. "Let's table this for now, Lena," he said dismissively. "We've got more pressing matters to discuss." I tried to hide my frustration, but I could feel the color rising in my cheeks. It wasn't just the dismissal of my ideas, it was the complete lack of respect. In that moment, I realized something was shifting. I had spent years building trust with my father, but now it seemed like all that hard work was being pushed aside for what? My father never gave me a clear answer, just vague promises that we'll revisit this later. And so, I did what I always did. I buried my disappointment and moved forward. But the cracks were becoming harder to ignore. Over the next few weeks, I noticed my father and Ryan spending more and more time together. Lunch meetings turned into daily affairs, and every time I entered the room, they would stop talking, awkwardly pretending like nothing was going on. I didn't need to be a genius to recognize the pattern. They were excluding me. And then there was James Bennett, Dad's old college roommate, a man I had never heard of before, was suddenly brought in as a strategic consultant. I didn't question my father's decision at first. After all, James had 40 years in the industry. But the more I learned about him, the more I began to feel uneasy. James was a big believer in value engineering, which, as I quickly realized, meant cutting corners on sustainable practices in favor of higher profit margins. When I asked to see his reports, Dad told me they were still in development. That felt like a red flag to me. It wasn't just the reports. It was the way James started taking over key decisions. He began questioning the contracts I had carefully crafted, making alterations to client agreements without consulting me first. And then came the real blow. The West Side Commons project, the one that I had poured my heart and soul into, the one I had fought to make the cornerstone of our sustainability initiatives, was being redesigned. The solar arrays, the rainwater systems, the community green spaces, they were all being eliminated. I couldn't let this slide. "What's going on here?" I asked when I found my father, Ryan, James, and 2 board members sitting in the conference room with blueprints spread out in front of them. "Why are we changing the West Side Commons design? This was supposed to be our flagship project. The whole city approved the permits based on these features." Dad looked up from the table, startled. He wasn't used to me questioning him in front of others. "We're just exploring some value engineering options," he said, trying to brush it off. "Nothing final." I could feel my heart pounding. This wasn't just value engineering. This was a fundamental shift away from everything I had worked for, everything I had built. "Value engineering?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You're cutting the solar panels and the rainwater systems? These were cornerstone features of the design. The city approved our permits based on them." James cleared his throat, looking over at my father. "The initial estimates were perhaps overly optimistic about the ROI on these features. We're just recalibrating to market realities." Market realities? I had run those numbers myself. They were solid, and we had already ordered materials. This wasn't about market realities. It was about pushing my vision aside in favor of something easier, something that would make more money in the short term. My stomach churned with the realization that my father had already made up his mind. "I've been managing this project for years," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've built relationships with every supplier, every contractor. We've already committed to these features." "Let's discuss this later, Lena," Dad said, standing up and cutting me off. "James has some insights that are worth considering." I felt my world start to tilt. I was being shut out. Again. I had given everything to this company, to my family, and yet here I was, being dismissed in front of my colleagues, in front of the board. For a moment, I considered walking out of that room, leaving the company behind, but I didn't. Instead, I clenched my fists and stayed seated, knowing that if I left now, it would mean I had given up everything, and I wasn't ready to do that yet. But the signs were clear. The foundation I had spent years building was starting to crack. The worst part? I didn't know how to fix it. That night, as I sat in my office, staring at the designs for West Side Commons on my computer screen, I felt a deep sense of betrayal. This was my project, my vision, and now it was slipping through my fingers. I had always thought my father's legacy was something I would inherit, not just in name, but in purpose. But with every decision being made without me, with every key role being handed over to Ryan or James, I felt like I was being erased. And then the phone rang. It was Jessica, my assistant. She sounded nervous, like she didn't know whether she should be calling me. "Lena, I think you need to know something," she said, her voice shaky. "Your father and Ryan—" "What is it?" I asked, feeling a pit form in my stomach. "They've been meeting with Richard Maxwell's son, Connor," Jessica said, hesitating. "They've been showing him around the office. He's been shadowing different departments. I think they're grooming him to take your place." My heart sank. Everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed, was being handed over to someone else. I had no idea how long this had been in the works, how long my father had been planning to replace me with someone who had no understanding of the company, of the legacy we had built together. And in that moment, I realized just how far gone things had truly become. The following days blurred together. I tried to keep up with the workload, meeting clients and overseeing projects, but every time I walked into the office, it felt like walking to a place where I no longer belonged. The walls, once a place where my name was respected and trusted, now felt like barriers, guarding secrets, excluding me from the conversation I had always been a part of. Every meeting I wasn't invited to, every decision that was made without me, chipped away at my confidence, at my belief that I still had a place in the company I had given my everything to. But it wasn't just the exclusion that was hurting me. It was the realization that my father, the man who had raised me to believe in the value of hard work and loyalty, had allowed someone else, someone I didn't trust, to tear apart everything I had built. James Bennett, with his polished smile and empty promises, had managed to worm his way into our company with ease, taking control without my father ever once questioning his methods. And then there was Ryan. My brother, the one person I had always tried to protect, was now complicit in this betrayal. He'd always struggled to find his footing in the company, constantly overshadowed by my ambition and drive. But instead of using his position to learn and grow, he seemed content to ride on my coattails. He had never truly earned the respect of the crews or the clients. It wasn't hard to see what was happening. He had made his choice. The question was, why did Dad allow it? On the morning after our latest confrontation, I woke up early, my mind racing. My phone had buzzed several times with missed calls from clients, colleagues, and even a few suppliers. I had ignored them all. What could I possibly say? That I was being slowly pushed out of my own company, my own family? That my father was letting a stranger rewrite everything I had worked for? It felt like a nightmare I couldn't escape. As I sat there in my office, I stared out at the city skyline, the rain tapping lightly against the window. Portland had always been my home, my constant, but now it felt like I was a stranger here too. The weight of everything pressing down on me was unbearable, yet I couldn't give up. I had come too far to let everything fall apart. But I didn't know what to do anymore. I felt completely alone. I needed answers. I couldn't keep living like this, pretending everything was fine when the ground beneath me was cracking open. That afternoon, I drove to my parents' house. I hadn't been there in weeks, not since that last family dinner when everything had shifted. I pulled up to the familiar driveway, the house that I had once thought of as a sanctuary. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that fills a home when something important is about to happen. I could see my father's Range Rover parked out front, along with my mother's Volvo and Ethan's Audi. The two unfamiliar cars were parked behind, and I immediately recognized them as belonging to James Bennett and his son, Connor. I hesitated for a moment, sitting in my car across the street. My mind was spinning with questions. Why wasn't I invited? Why were they all here together without me? Had they planned this for weeks? Were they really that determined to push me out? I watched them through the window, gathered around the dining table, laughing, talking, as if nothing had changed. My father, the man who had always sat at the head of the table, was smiling. Ethan was gesturing enthusiastically, his face animated with the same fake enthusiasm he always had. And there were James and Connor, comfortably seated at the table, fitting in like they had always been a part of the family. It felt like a slap in the face. I had given everything to this company. I had sacrificed my own happiness for it. And now they were all sitting there, pretending that I had never existed in this space. For a moment, I thought about storming in, pounding on the door, demanding answers. But something stopped me. A strange calm washed over me, as if the years of stress and frustration had finally reached their peak. I didn't need to make a scene. I didn't need to beg for answers. What I needed was to walk away, to stop caring about the people who had abandoned me without a second thought. They had made their choice, and it was time for me to make mine. I started my car and drove away, my heart heavy with a mix of anger and resignation. As I drove through the rain-soaked streets of Portland, I passed the buildings I had helped create. The Miller offices with their iconic curved facade, the Parkside apartments that had won us an award for design. I had been a part of that, a part of something bigger than myself, and now it felt like all of it had been stolen from me. I drove aimlessly for hours, letting the rain cleanse the anger and disappointment. When I finally returned home, I found myself sitting on the couch, staring at my phone. No messages from my parents, no texts from my colleagues, not even a call from Ethan, who I once thought would be my ally in all of this. It was like I had disappeared from their lives completely. The next morning, I woke up to the same emptiness. I reached for my phone instinctively, hoping for some kind of explanation, but there was nothing, just the silence of betrayal. But then I received a call. It was from Jessica, my assistant, and her voice was filled with panic. "Lena," she said, her words tumbling out, "you need to know what's going on. Your father, Ryan, and James, they've been meeting secretly with Connor Maxwell. They've been grooming him to take your place." My stomach dropped. I knew it. I had known this was coming, but hearing it from Jessica made it all too real. I felt the walls closing in even more. It wasn't just that they were replacing me, it was that they were doing it quietly, without any explanation, without even the decency to include me in the conversation. "What about the company?" I asked, my voice shaking with frustration. "What are they doing to Carter Construction?" "It's all falling apart," Jessica said. "They're slowly dismantling everything you built. They've canceled all your projects, cut the sustainable building initiatives, and they've started pushing luxury condos instead. Your vision, Lena, everything you worked for, it's all being erased." I felt a wave of nausea hit me. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was a destruction of everything I had poured my heart into. And yet, as angry as I was, there was nothing I could do. My hands were tied. I had given my all, and now it felt like I had nothing left. But even in the midst of all this, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them get away with it, not without a fight. The days after that phone call were some of the longest of my life. I had always considered myself a person of action, someone who didn't sit idly by when things were wrong. But now, I found myself in limbo. I had been erased. The company I had dedicated myself to, the company that had been my life's work, had not only moved on without me, but was actively working to undo everything I had built. I spent countless hours pacing through my apartment, looking at the empty boxes piled around me. Some were filled with memories, photos from client meetings, awards from the projects I'd led, and the few personal mementos I had managed to hold onto over the years. But the real sting came when I saw the last box, the one that had arrived a few days earlier, my old office items. My computer, my desk chair, the plants I had nurtured, the hard hat with Carter Construction emblazoned across it. Everything I had touched, everything that had been part of my identity, was now boxed up and shipped to my doorstep. The symbol of my failure, my loss, was sitting right in front of me. For a moment, I thought about throwing everything out, about walking away and never looking back. But there was something deep inside me that refused to let go. I had worked too hard, sacrificed too much to just give up. That afternoon, I decided to confront the truth. I had to hear it from the source. No more rumors, no more whispers. I was going straight to the top. I grabbed my coat, checked my phone one last time, no messages from my parents, and headed out the door. My heart was pounding as I made my way to my parents' house. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about family. It was about the man who had raised me to believe that hard work and loyalty meant something. It was about the father who had taught me that legacy was built on more than just profits. It was built on trust, integrity, and love. But now, I wasn't sure if any of that had been true. As I pulled up to their house, I felt the weight of years of expectation bearing down on me. I was a grown woman, a leader in my own right, but here I was, feeling like a child, standing in the shadow of my father's house. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door. Victoria, my mother, opened it with a strained smile. "Lena, what are you doing here? We weren't expecting you." I stepped inside, not waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firm but controlled. My mother looked taken aback, but she didn't try to stop me. She led me into the living room, where Victor was sitting in his usual chair by the fireplace. Ethan was there too, sitting on the couch, flipping through his phone like nothing was wrong. "Have a seat, Lena," my father said, his voice cold, distant. The warmth he once had when he spoke to me, when he spoke to anyone, was gone. His eyes were tired, his shoulders slumped, as if the weight of everything was too much for him to bear. "I think we both know why I'm here," I said, standing across from them. I didn't want to sit. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of making me feel comfortable. I want answers. Victor sighed and looked away for a moment before meeting my gaze. "Lena, you've been part of this family business for as long as I can remember. But things change. People change. I thought you'd understand that." "I understand change," I said, my voice hardening, "but I don't understand betrayal. You let James Bennett walk all over everything I've worked for. You let Ryan take my place, even though he hasn't earned it. And worst of all, you let me walk away with nothing. No explanation, no goodbye." Ethan looked uncomfortable, but he didn't speak. I wasn't sure if he was too embarrassed to say anything or if he just didn't know what to say. But that silence, his silence, spoke volumes. "You don't understand, Lena," Victor said, his voice low. "This company is my legacy, and I had to protect it. I had to protect you, too, in a way. You were pushing too hard. You wanted to change everything about the company, and it was too much, too fast." I felt my pulse quicken. "Protect me? You think I wanted to destroy the company? I wanted to build it. I wanted to make it better. You taught me that legacy wasn't just about profits. It was about doing things the right way, about leaving the world better than we found it." Victor stood up suddenly, his face flushed. "And that's where you're wrong, Lena," he snapped. "You've been so focused on your ideals, you forgot what makes this business run. It's not about your green buildings or your sustainable projects. It's about surviving. It's about making money. And he paused, as if the word disgusted him, "your ideals were driving us into the ground." I took a step forward. "You think I don't understand business? You think I don't know how to make money? Everything I did was for this company, for the future." Victor shook his head, his eyes narrowing. "I'm sorry, Lena, but you've lost touch. You've lost your place in this company. And the truth is, you never really fit in." I felt my heart drop, as if the floor had opened beneath me. "What do you mean by that?" My voice was barely above a whisper, but it hit him like a punch. "You think you're better than us? You think you're some kind of savior?" he spat, his voice growing louder. "But you're not. You're just a dreamer, and this company doesn't have time for dreamers." I stood there, frozen. This was it. This was the moment I had feared my whole life. The moment I realized that everything I had believed in, everything I had fought for, had been a lie. "You're out, Lena," Victor said, his voice final. "The board has made its decision, and it's time for you to move on." My chest tightened. The words felt like daggers cutting deeper with every syllable. "And what about Ryan? What about the company you promised would be mine?" Victor looked at Ryan, who had barely said a word during the entire conversation. Ryan shifted uncomfortably on the couch before meeting my gaze, but I could see the hesitation in his eyes. "Dad's right, Lena," he said. "Maybe it's time for a change, for all of us." The betrayal hit me like a ton of bricks. My own brother, my own flesh and blood. He was the one who had stood by me through so much. And now he was turning his back on me too. I stood there, taking it all in. This was the end of everything I had worked for. My family, my career, my future, all gone in an instant. but I wasn't going to let them see me break. Not now, not ever. I turned to walk out, my legs feeling like lead, but as I reached the door, I stopped. "I'm not done yet," I said, my voice steady. "You may have thrown me out, but I'm going to build something better, something that matters, something that doesn't need your approval." With that, I stepped out into the night, the rain soaking through my clothes, but I didn't care. I wasn't a part of the past anymore. I was building my future. The first few weeks after leaving Carter Construction were a blur. I had been kicked out of the company that had been my life's work, cut off by the people who had once been my closest allies, my family. They had made their choice, and I had made mine. I could have fought them, stormed into court, demanded answers, but at that point, I knew that wouldn't solve anything. I had nothing left to prove to them. The only person I needed to prove anything to was myself. I spent my days in the small apartment I had rented after leaving the house I'd shared with my parents. It was a stark contrast to the sleek, polished offices and fancy dinner meetings I had been accustomed to. This apartment was small, bare, but it had potential. It felt like the beginning of something new. Every corner of the apartment reminded me of how far I had fallen and how far I was determined to rise. I started with small steps, filling the apartment with pieces that had meaning. A simple desk, a comfortable chair, a few plants to bring life to the space. I needed to make it feel like mine. My father's voice still echoed in my head, his harsh words, his dismissal, but I refused to let them dictate my future. I wasn't done, not by a long shot. But the truth was, I had no idea where to start. Carter Construction had been my life. It had been my identity, my purpose. And now, without it, I felt like I was adrift. I had no clients, no projects, and no idea where to go next. I couldn't go back to Carter Construction, not after what happened. But I couldn't just give up. I had to rebuild from the ground up. I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep dwelling on the past. It was time to look forward. But how? I pulled out my laptop and began researching. What did I want to do? What was I passionate about? And then it hit me. I had spent my entire career focusing on sustainable building practices, on making the world a better place, one project at a time. I had always believed that construction could be a force for good, that buildings didn't just have to be structures, they could be a part of the community, of the environment. I didn't need to go back to Carter Construction to do that. I could do it on my own. The idea of starting my own consulting firm began to form in my mind. Green Horizon Consulting. It would be a company focused on sustainable building practices, helping small and mid-sized construction firms meet the growing demand for eco-friendly, energy-efficient designs. I knew I had the knowledge, the experience, and the drive. All I needed was the courage to take that first step. But courage wasn't easy to come by when you were starting over. The first few weeks were the hardest. I spent hours scouring the internet, reaching out to old contacts and making calls. It felt like pushing a boulder up a hill, slow, frustrating, and exhausting. But with every small victory, every positive response, I could feel myself coming back to life. The first call I received from a potential client, a small development company in North Portland, felt like a lifeline. They needed a consultant to help them with a new mixed-use project that had a strong emphasis on sustainable living. They had heard of my work through an old colleague, and after a long conversation, they agreed to hire me for the job. That phone call changed everything. It was the first step, the first piece of the foundation that I would build Green Horizon upon. With that contract in hand, I knew I had to take action. I hired a small team, 2 young, passionate architects who shared my vision for sustainable building practices. We worked tirelessly on the project, developing innovative designs that not only met the city's sustainability guidelines, but exceeded them. We found ways to integrate solar panels, rainwater collection systems, and recycled materials into the design, making the project both eco-friendly and cost-effective. As the project moved forward, I found myself regaining a sense of purpose. The work was fulfilling, and the clients were happy with the results. But it wasn't just about the success of the project. It was about proving to myself that I could build something from nothing. I was no longer the daughter of Victor Carter. I was Lena Carter, founder of Green Horizon Consulting, and I was doing things my way. But even as things started to pick up, the shadow of my past lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone was waiting for me to fail. It was hard not to compare my new venture to Carter Construction. My mind would drift to the legacy I had lost, the clients I had built relationships with, and the vision I had fought so hard for. But every time that thought crept in, I would remind myself, this is my chance to build something that is truly mine. I kept pushing forward, throwing myself into the work. I met with new clients, pitched new ideas, and grew my reputation as a consultant who could deliver results. Slowly, Green Horizon Consulting began to gain traction. We were getting referrals, we were getting recognition, and perhaps most importantly, I was starting to feel like I had regained control over my life. But the real turning point came when I received an invitation to meet with a former colleague, Catherine Walsh. Catherine owned a small development firm called Walsh Community Developments, and she had been following my work from afar. She was impressed by the innovative solutions I had brought to the Green Horizon project, and she wanted to talk about collaborating on a new venture, a community center project in North Portland. The meeting was a turning point for me. Catherine was one of the first people who truly understood my vision. She wasn't just interested in the numbers, she was interested in creating something meaningful, something that would make a difference. It was the kind of partnership I had always wanted, one based on mutual respect and shared values. Together, we began working on the Community Center project, which would focus on affordable housing for healthcare workers in the area. We used reclaimed materials, energy-efficient designs, and green building techniques to make the project not only sustainable, but also affordable. The project became our flagship, a symbol of what Green Horizon Consulting was all about, making the world a better place, one building at a time. As we moved forward with the project, I found myself gaining the confidence I had lost during those dark months after leaving Carter Construction. I no longer felt like a failure. I was building something that mattered, something I could be proud of. And the best part? I was doing it on my own terms. The Community Center project was a huge success, and it gained recognition in the industry for its innovative design and sustainable features. It was everything I had dreamed of, a project that wasn't just about profit, but about making a real difference in people's lives. But the true victory came when we completed the project and I stood outside the community center with Catherine, watching the healthcare workers and their families move into their new homes. The feeling of pride and accomplishment was indescribable. I had built something meaningful, something that would last. And as I looked at the building we had created, I realized that it wasn't just about the bricks and mortar. It was about the foundation I had laid for myself. A foundation built on resilience, on the lessons I had learned, and on the courage to start again. As the months passed, I found myself at a crossroads. Green Horizon was growing, thriving even, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I had finally started to rebuild my life after the betrayal, but I still felt that heavy weight in my chest, the unresolved questions, the lack of closure from the people who had once been everything to me. Catherine and I had become good partners. Our collaboration on the Community Center project had garnered attention, and now we were working on several more projects that focused on affordable housing and sustainable design. My name was becoming well known in the industry again, and it felt like the work I had always wanted to do was finally coming to fruition. Yet, as I stood on the construction sites, overseeing the final touches, I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that the shadow of my past was looming just beyond the horizon. Everything seemed to be going well, but then, out of nowhere, a phone call came that I wasn't expecting. It was from Jessica. "Lena," she said, her voice tight, "I don't know if you've been keeping track of what's happening with Carter Construction, but there's something you need to hear." I felt my stomach tighten. The name Carter Construction still sent a jolt through my system. I hadn't spoken to anyone from the company in months, but somehow I knew this wasn't going to be good news. "What is it, Jessica?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's been a huge blowback from the West Side Commons project. They've hit a major financial roadblock," she explained. "There are cost overruns, quality issues, and now they're dealing with permit violations because they didn't honor the environmental commitments from the original design. The city is threatening to pull the project entirely." I sat down in shock. The West Side Commons project? My project, the one that had been the heart and soul of my vision for Carter Construction, was falling apart. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could they have messed it up so badly? "They're in deep trouble, Lena," Jessica continued, her voice filled with pity. "And there's something else. Your father and Ryan, they're desperately trying to reach you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My father, the man who had unceremoniously cut me out of the company, was now trying to reach me? For what? To apologize? To explain? But deep down, I knew it wasn't about that. They were in trouble, and they needed me. They always needed me when things went wrong. "I can't believe this," I muttered, staring out the window. "I told them this would happen. I warned them. But they wouldn't listen. They just had to replace me with someone who didn't know what they were doing." "Lena, I know you've been through a lot," Jessica said gently, "but they really are in a crisis. They can't fix this without you. They're begging you to come back." The desperation in Jessica's voice struck me. It was clear that whatever had happened, whatever had gone wrong at Carter Construction, they couldn't solve it on their own. But why should I help them? Why should I go back to the people who had thrown me away without a second thought? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I hung up the phone and sat in silence, processing everything. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email from an old colleague who still worked at Carter Construction. It was a message with a subject line that sent a chill down my spine. The truth about the takeover. I clicked on the email, and as I read, the pieces finally began to fall into place. The betrayal, the manipulation, the sudden shift in the company's direction, everything I had felt but couldn't understand was now clear. James Bennett hadn't just been a consultant. He had orchestrated the entire takeover of Carter Construction from the inside. The changes that had pushed me out were all part of his plan. He had used my father's health problems as leverage, playing on his fears of mortality and control, convincing him that I was too radical for the company, that my ideas were destroying the legacy they had worked so hard to build. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief as I read the email. My father had allowed this. Ryan had allowed this. They had let themselves be manipulated by someone who didn't care about the company, didn't care about the legacy, didn't care about anything but his own agenda. And now, Carter Construction was paying the price. I sat there for a long time, processing the flood of emotions that surged through me. I had given everything to that company, my time, my energy, my heart, and now it was crumbling. But the hardest part was realizing that I had been right. My vision, the sustainable future I had tried to build, wasn't just a dream. It was a practical, viable future. They had dismissed it, and now they were facing the consequences. But I couldn't let this be my story anymore. I had walked away from Carter Construction once, and I wasn't going back. No matter how much they begged, no matter how much they needed me, I couldn't return to the place that had betrayed me. This was my chance to do something completely different, something that didn't depend on the ghosts of the past. I picked up the phone and dialed Catherine's number. She answered on the second ring. "Lena," she said, her voice warm and welcoming, "is everything okay?" I took a deep breath. "Catherine, I've made a decision. I'm not going back to Carter Construction. They need me, but I can't go back. I've already built something here, something that matters. Green Horizon is my future, and I'm not going to let it fall apart." She paused for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was filled with conviction. Lena, I've always believed in you, and I know this is the right choice. You've already started making a difference. Carter Construction is in the past now. You're building something new, and you're not alone. You have us. I felt a sense of relief wash over me as I hung up the phone. For the first time in months, I felt like I had clarity. The path forward was clear. It wasn't about going back to a company that no longer respected me. It was about moving forward, creating something that was truly mine, something that reflected my values, my vision. I looked out the window, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The city was bustling with life, but I wasn't part of that old world anymore. I was part of something new, something bigger than just buildings and profits. I was part of a movement to change the way we build, the way we live, and the way we work together. And that, I realized, was worth fighting for. It had been nearly a year since I left Carter Construction behind. In that time, Green Horizon Consulting had become more than just a business. It had become my redemption. Each project we completed, each client we helped, brought me a step closer to the woman I had always wanted to be. Someone who didn't need the approval of others to thrive. Someone who could build a future on her own terms, without relying on the legacy of a name that no longer held meaning. The community center project we had worked on with Catherine was a huge success. It wasn't just about the accolades or the recognition. It was about knowing that we had done something meaningful. We had created a space for people who truly needed it, and it had brought people together in a way I never thought possible. It was the perfect representation of the future I had envisioned for myself and my career. But even as I celebrated that success, I couldn't escape the feeling that the past was still lurking in the background. Carter Construction, the company that had once been my entire world, was still struggling. I had heard bits and pieces through the industry grapevine about their financial troubles, about the mess they were dealing with in the wake of the West Side Commons project. But it wasn't until I received an unexpected call that I realized just how deep the cracks had become. It was from my mother, Victoria. "Lena," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "your father he's not well. I think you should come." I felt my stomach drop. I hadn't heard from my parents in months. After everything that had happened, I had assumed they were moving on, continuing with their lives and their business without me. The last time I saw my father, it had been under strained circumstances. He had refused to acknowledge the part he played in the destruction of my career. He had pushed me away, and in that moment, I had let him go. But hearing my mother's voice, filled with so much pain, pulled me back in. "Mom, what happened?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. "What's going on?" "Your father's health, it's been getting worse. He's been hiding it from us, but I think it's catching up with him. He wants to see you. He's asking for you." I didn't hesitate. I couldn't. Despite everything that had happened, despite the anger and the betrayal, I was still his daughter, and he was still my father. I packed my things and drove to their house in Portland, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. What had happened? Was it serious? And, most importantly, did he truly want to make amends, or was this just another chapter in the long saga of our broken relationship? When I arrived, I was greeted by my mother, who looked exhausted. Her face was drawn, and her eyes were clouded with worry. "He's upstairs," she said softly. "He's been asking for you." I climbed the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. As I pushed open the door to my father's bedroom, I was taken aback by the sight of him. He looked smaller than I remembered, frail and vulnerable in a way I had never seen before. His once strong frame, which had been the backbone of Carter Construction, now seemed fragile and thin, covered in blankets. "Lena," he whispered when he saw me. His voice was weak, but there was a softness to it that made me pause. "I'm sorry." I didn't know what to say. I had expected anger, regret, perhaps even guilt, but I didn't expect this. My father had never been the type to apologize for anything. He was always the one who stood tall, unwavering, as if his decisions were final, even when they were wrong. But now he seemed like a man who had run out of time, and I couldn't help but feel pity for him. I don't know what to say, I replied, my voice steady but filled with emotion. You've hurt me, Dad. You've taken everything I worked for and thrown it away without so much as a conversation. I don't know how to forgive that. He looked away, guilt flooding his expression. I know, Lena, I know. I've been a fool. All my life, I've built this company, built this legacy, and I thought it was the most important thing in the world. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. I lost sight of what mattered most. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to shout, to remind him of the years of pain he had caused me. But another part of me, one that had been buried for so long, wanted to listen. Maybe this was the moment I had been waiting for. Maybe this was my chance to finally hear him out. I've made mistakes, Lena, he continued, his voice shaking. I've pushed you away, and I've hurt you in ways I can never take back. But I want you to know, from the bottom of my heart, that I never meant to. I thought I was doing what was best, but I didn't see how much it was costing me, how much it cost you. I felt a lump form in my throat. This wasn't the man I had grown up with. This wasn't the man who had always been so certain of everything. This was a man who had finally realized that his legacy was nothing without the people who had helped him build it. I've been blind, he whispered, and now I can't undo the damage I've caused. For a long time, I sat there in silence, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I didn't know if I could ever fully forgive him. I didn't know if I even wanted to. But as I looked at him, sitting there in his bed, I realized that forgiveness wasn't about him. It wasn't about giving him a pass or letting him off the hook. It was about me, about letting go of the pain and finding peace. Dad, I said quietly, my voice trembling, I don't know if I can forgive you, but I'm not going to carry this anger with me anymore. I'm done letting it control me. He nodded, his eyes filled with tears. I don't deserve your forgiveness, Lena, but I hope, someday, you'll find it in your heart. As I stood up to leave, I felt a sense of finality. It wasn't the closure I had hoped for, but it was a step forward. I wasn't going to let the past define me anymore. It had been a long, hard road to get here, but I had built something new, something real, and that was enough for me. As I walked out of my father's house, the weight of everything seemed to lift off my shoulders. The conversation with him, the difficult realization that my relationship with my family would never be the same, was finally over. But it had given me something invaluable, clarity, a sense of closure. I wasn't bound by the past anymore. The damage had been done, and I could either let it define me, or I could move forward, building something new and truly my own. I drove back to my small apartment, feeling the cool Portland air settle around me like a new skin. For so long, I had been weighed down by the past, the betrayal, the rejection, the failures, but now I was free. And I had only one goal: to keep building, to keep moving forward no matter what. Back at my apartment, I set down my keys and immediately pulled out my laptop. I had been putting this off for so long, but now, with the weight of the past behind me, it was time to take the next step. Green Horizon Consulting had grown significantly over the past year, but I wanted to build something bigger, something that would allow me to make a real impact on the world, not just in construction, but in every aspect of the work I did. I started drafting a plan for a new project, an eco-friendly housing community in Portland. This wasn't just about building houses. It was about changing the way people lived. It was about giving people affordable housing that didn't compromise on sustainability, that didn't damage the environment or the community. This was the project I had always dreamed of, a project that would not only create homes, but a lifestyle, a future. By the time I had finished the first draft of the proposal, I knew it wasn't just a project. It was my purpose. It was the future I wanted to create, and it was time to bring it to life. The next day, I reached out to every client, every colleague I had ever worked with. I told them about the project, about my vision for the future, that how hot they could be a part for it. The response was overwhelming. People were eager to collaborate, to join me in this new journey. It was clear that I had found my true calling, not in the ruins of Carter construction, but in something completely new, completely mine. In the following months, Green Horizon Consulting grew even faster. We secured funding for the eco-friendly housing project, and the groundwork began. The project was a success not only because of the sustainable materials we used or the energy-efficient designs we implemented, but because it had heart. It had meaning. It was a symbol of the future, of what was possible when you put people and the planet before profits. Looking back on it, the betrayal had been the catalyst I needed. It had broken me down, but in doing so, it had allowed me to build something stronger, something I could truly be proud of. I wasn't just rebuilding my career, I was rebuilding myself. And I wasn't alone. I had my team, my clients, and most importantly, I had a purpose. The legacy I had always wanted to create was no longer tied to a company or a name. It was tied to the work I was doing, to the change I was making in the world. I had built something new, from the ground up. And for the first time in years, I was exactly where I needed to be. The phone rang again, but this time I wasn't nervous. I knew it was probably my father or maybe Ryan reaching out with some excuse or some last-ditch effort to bring me back into the fold. But I didn't need them anymore. I had my own path now. I took a deep breath, picked up the phone, and smiled. It was time to move forward.
So, what do you think of Lena's journey? Was it a path of redemption? Or just the inevitable consequence of choosing to forge her own way? I'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings about the story. Feel free to drop a comment with your take or any insights you have. Did you find inspiration in her resilience? Or maybe you saw yourself in her struggle for identity and independence? If you enjoyed the story and want to hear more of Lena's journey or stories that challenge the status quo, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Your support helps keep the stories coming. And trust me, there's plenty more on the way. Thanks so much for sticking with me through this journey. I appreciate each one of you who took the time to listen and reflect. Stay tuned, because the next chapter might just surprise you.